In today's video, I'm going to be showing you 3 incredible games by the real GOAT of chess, the open source computer engine known as Stockfish 16. Each one of these games contains a sacrificial attack of such power and accuracy that it will make Magnus Carlsen look like a bumbling amateur by comparison. Stockfish's opponent here is Komodo version 14.1, so without any further delay, let's get right into these god-level games. In this first game we're going to be looking at, Stockfish has the white pieces. In fact, Stockfish is going to be playing white in all 3 of the games we're going to be looking at. And we have a very normal queen's pawn opening, which turns into a closed Catalan. Very standard opening moves. This is all theory. And the first really interesting moment comes when the capture is made on d5. The knight takes on d5, hitting the bishop on f4. And what do you do here as white? Do you move that bishop? No. Stockfish says, you can have my bishop. I'm going to go for development. Knight to c3. Komodo takes him up on it. He says, I will take that bishop out because after g takes f4, I have queen to c7. And how are you going to defend this pawn? Are you going to try? You can't play this because the bishop will take the rook here. I mean, you could push the pawn, all right. But Stockfish, he's got other ideas. He plays knight to e5. And Komodo gets a little excited here, saying that he can win a pawn. He can give that knight a kick, goes back to d3, defending the pawn here on f4, but that knight can be taken out with the bishop. After queen takes d3, queen takes f4, Stockfish has gambited a pawn in order to do what? Well, he starts by pressuring c6 with the queen, not to mention attacking the pawn on e6. So he drops the queen back to defend. And now Stockfish has a very nice move here. See if you can predict, what should white do here to cause black a little difficulty? The move Stockfish found was d5, taking advantage of 2 sensitive diagonals. This one right here, the queen's lined up on the king and the bishop lined up on the rook. So Komodo begins by giving the queen a little kick. All right, the queen drops back to b3. That didn't really change a whole lot. And then takes the pawn on d5. And Stockfish already could just take with the knight, because the whole point of this whole variation is that if you take, then there's going to be the bishop taking here or the queen taking either way, and this rook is going to fall because this comes with check. But Stockfish doesn't go for that quite yet. It's decided that e4 is stronger, just putting more pressure on the pawn, which is pinned to the king. And Komodo plays b4, giving the knight a kick. This is not correct. Stockfish was saying that you should just get some development in. But after b4, there's this beautiful move from Stockfish. Knight to b5, hitting the queen. Okay, the knight's taken out, and it looks like white is just down a piece. How do we get our piece back? Here's a little quiz position for you. Pause the video if you want. White has only one move here that doesn't lose. See if you can find it. The move Stockfish played was e5. Necessary. Coming with an attack on the queen, so something has to be done about that. F takes e5 is what's played. Now queen takes d5 check, and the rook is going to be picked up. So what happens is queen takes d5, bishop takes d5, king moves. Then we grab the rook. And this isn't the end of the line for Komodo, because he does have 2 pawns for the exchange. But because Stockfish has so much activity, he's able to win. So the game continues with bishop to c5, king g2, that pawn was pinned. And it's interesting that Komodo doesn't try to develop this knight anytime soon. I guess the issue is if you were to go knight d7, then bishop c6 would hit the knight, and so it would pick up this pawn on b5. You could try to go to a6, but then bishop b7 is what Stockfish recommends. Knight goes to c7, and then the rooks just get active. It's giving this line here with f4, and then the rook comes in. I don't know. I don't understand all the ins and outs. You could probably study this pretty deeply if you wanted to, but all I know is that Komodo decides to push some pawns, and Stockfish gets active with its rooks, and they eventually infiltrate, or one of them does anyway, hitting the knight. Okay, it goes here, and then at the end of the day, the rook is just too active, and Stockfish ends up grabbing a couple pawns. Finally, we see the rook take the pawn on a5 right here, and now it's just even pawns, and Stockfish is just the exchange up and is able to convert this into a win. It does take a while. The game doesn't end until move 92. So some very nice middle game play, Stockfish demonstrating how to take advantage of weak diagonals and his opponent's lack of development. So moving on, we'll go to game number 2. Stockfish again white, and this time we have a Sicilian defense. And we're going to see a lot of book moves because both programs are playing with an opening book. So I'm going to get to the most interesting moment here. Queen b6 attacks the knight drops back to f3. Queen to c7 from Komodo, anticipating bishop to e3, which doesn't come yet. In fact, I don't know if it ever comes. Bishop to b7. Okay, I'm trying to get to... Okay, here's the blunder. Knight to c6. Big blunder here from Komodo. What's so bad about this move? Well, the black king is in the middle, and Komodo is not doing anything to make progress towards castling. And Stockfish is able to take advantage of this, beginning with the move a4, which might be counterintuitive. Why would you play on that wing over there when the king in the center is the big problem for black? Well, we'll see. This pawn on b5 is under attack, so it's pushed to b4. And now we have a beautiful move by Stockfish. What would you play here as white? The knight's under attack. Where do you go? Well, the move Stockfish plays is actually a fairly common idea when the king is stuck in the center. We have knight to d5, hitting the queen. Now, of course, the knight can be captured, but now e takes d5 comes with check. Are we winning the piece back? Actually, no, because Komodo can put it in the way, like so. So what's the deal here? Did Stockfish just blunder? Oh no. It goes ahead with c4. The whole point to playing a4 earlier, this pawn is no longer b5 to capture on c4. So that's why knight d5 wasn't played before that move a4. But it can take on c3. But you know what? Stockfish doesn't care. It's not going to recapture that pawn. Queen b3 is the move here. And the threat is to play d6 with the fork. The queen will have to capture that pawn, and then this bishop will drop because the queen was defending the bishop. So Komodo just defends. Okay. And obviously taking on b2 is an option, but bishop takes b2. That's just too much activity, I guess. You know, you don't want this bishop to be bearing down on the king side. Look how tied up the king side is. No development over here. The king's in the middle. So that would have been worse. But at this point, Stockfish is winning. Rook to b8. Stockfish takes on c3. Bishop e8. Okay. Opening up an attack on the queen. Just moves to a2. g6. Now Komodo's going to try to develop. But now here come the pawns. Bishop to g7 hits the rook. And Stockfish doesn't even care. Bishop to a3 because we have a strong attack going in the center. Now, what's the problem here? What if you were to take the rook? Queen to a1 comes with an attack on this rook on h8. And then what do? You try to block it? We take here, and if the knight takes, we take here. All right, now I see. Queen's hitting the rook. We got the attack going on the knight. It's all very nasty. So Komodo goes with this d6 move, just trying to block this bishop from accessing the knight there. Stockfish continues with c5. And it's just beautiful to see how being a piece down does not matter in a situation like this, where all these pieces are tied up and the development is horrible for black. Takes the pawn, okay. Rook a to c1. It's another thing I noticed with these computers playing each other is that oftentimes they'll just play the move they want to play. They don't need to prepare it. You'll see a real lack of preparation. If we go back a couple moves here, how many of us would say, okay, we need to put the rook here and then play c5? You know, the computers, they're just going to play it. They're just going to force the issue. And then the pawn takes, and then we put the rook here. This order works just fine. How are you going to save this pawn? It's going to drop off. The queen gets out of the way because it knows what's coming. Rook takes c5. Now we got knight to f6. Trying to get some development in. Maybe someday he can castle. But here we go. d6. And at this point, Komodo decides it's best to just castle. If you take the pawn, of course, the queen will be lost after rook c8 check. Bishop's going to get the queen. So castles is played. Now, Stockfish does get to grab the knight on e7, but that means the bishop on d3 falls. But Stockfish could grab a rook on f8, but doesn't even do it. Plays knight e5 first. We have a counterattack on the white queen because the knight was hitting the black queen here. Knight takes d3, bishop takes a2. Then we grab the rook. Bishop takes f8. And after all the smoke clears, Stockfish is simply an exchange up again and goes on to win a technical endgame. So a very nice piece sacrifice from Stockfish, which I don't know if it was able to see all the way to the winning sequence or if it just saw that its pieces were just way more active and the black king was stuck in the center. But moving on to our final game, we have an English opening, Stockfish again white. And we have book moves. And let's see, is this where things get interesting here? Okay, the knight's hitting the bishop on f5, and the best thing for black to do here apparently is to play knight takes d2, queen takes d2, and bishop to e6. But Komodo has other ideas. It plays e6, maybe thinking the Stockfish is going to take on f5, and after e takes f5, things are looking okay. But that's not what Stockfish is going to do, because Stockfish sees an opportunity to trap the bishop now. This bishop is short on squares. We got f3 hitting this knight first. Okay, it takes on d2, queen takes d2, and now we have d takes c4, allowing e4. Why would you do that as black? This bishop has nowhere to go. Well, Komodo is a strong program. It sees a lot. It takes on b3. Stockfish, of course, takes out the bishop, but look at this knight. Look who else is short on squares. Komodo has seen that it will have to move g5 in this position. Gonna get the piece back. We have bishop to h3 from Stockfish, some pressure on e6. The knight's taken, but now f takes e6, and then bishop takes e6 check after the pawn's recaptured, king moves, and now we take on b3 with the bishop. And now we have even material, but Stockfish thinks that it has a better position here. Knight c5 is what's played. Okay, bishop goes to c2. The knight reroutes to e6, targeting this d4 pawn here. Rook's put behind the pawn. Now c5. Queen to e3, grabs the pawn. This bishop must be eliminated since it is pinning the queen to the king. And how do you think Stockfish does it? What would you play here? Well, the move Stockfish chooses is not what most of you would probably play. It is not bishop takes bishop. It sacks the exchange with rook takes d4. And after knight takes d4, it's not real clear what this accomplished. What did that do? Usually when there's a sack of an exchange, we have some horrible weakening around the king or some positional advantage that we can put our finger on. But what did this really do? Well, let's see how Stockfish proceeds. We have a rook to d1. Okay, the knight's pinned to the queen, but, you know, you don't have to move that knight. It can just hang out there. Now we have a rook to f7 from Komodo. And here is an interesting moment. What would you play as white? Would you sack another exchange with rook takes d4? Because that's what Stockfish did. And after c takes d4, bishop takes d4 check. Now, the two bishops are bearing down on the king side. And the position is about equal, according to Stockfish. If black plays correctly, Komodo does not play correctly. What you're supposed to do here is king to g8, and bishop b3 will get the exchange back at some point. But instead, Komodo blocks with the rook. And this is worse because after queen to e4, there's a checkmate threat. This rook is pinned. It is not defending that pawn there, which is why queen g8 is played. But now black is completely tied up. Komodo is not going to be able to move the queen, the rook, or the king for a very long time. The queen is defending against checkmate. The rook is pinned. The king can't even move. How are you going to untangle yourself? And so Stockfish has time to just have his way with Komodo. Starts by taking the pawn on h4, keeping an eye on h7, keeping the bind alive. And now we have rook e8 from Komodo. And this is the only piece he can really move. And he moves it around a little bit. He comes in here, tries to harass the bishop, but that rook by itself just can't do a whole lot. He throws in a check, throws in another check. The king just tucks away on h3 comfortably, and there's no problem. Komodo plays rook e1, probably doesn't know what to do at this point. And then here come the white pawns. Stockfish is just going to slowly bring the pawns up the board, gets the king back here so that this h pawn can eventually get going. And then what happens is, goes to h5. Okay, Komodo's trading off a couple pawns over on the queen side, but it doesn't matter. King is getting out of danger here. Eventually we go queen to g5, and now we're ready for h6. What are you going to do? This rook is pinned. It's going to stay pinned until it's lost. Rook h1 check is played, doesn't do anything. King goes to g1. Rook comes back here. Just want to keep this bind alive until we can play h6. There it is. Okay, queen to f7. It's like, well, I know I'm losing the rook. The rook falls with check. King goes to g8. And at this point, we have a mate in 9 moves that begins with a very nice bishop sacrifice. Bishop takes h7 check. King takes. And then this is funny. Stockfish promotes the pawn to a bishop because it's immediately going to be taken off the board. But now queen to h4 check. And this is really remarkable how the queen and the bishop are able to dominate a queen and a rook because this king is so vulnerable. So, okay, the check's blocked, and this is a mate in 6, beginning with queen to e7 check. King moves to g6. I should point out back here that if king g6 had been played here, queen to h5 would be checkmate, which is why the rook blocked. Okay, so back to this, queen to e7 check, king goes to g6, queen d6 check, king to f7. See, what if we go here? What happens? Oh, queen to f5. That's mate. So the pawns are a key part of this checkmate. So that's why the king goes to f8, and then we have bishop to a3 check. Running out of options with that king. Yep, the check's blocked, and then the bishop just takes it out. And then you can only block with the rook, and there you go, checkmate. Just a really remarkable performance by Stockfish, sacking 2 exchanges to set up that lethal bind on the king. So I hope you enjoyed this coverage of these remarkable games between Stockfish and Komodo. Let me know in the comments what you think, if you want to see more of this in the future. So take care, and I'll see you on the next video.